Hi everybody, welcome to our Food for Life series as part of Outside Lives. In this series we are talking to Rachel Farr from the Cae Rhug Holistic Farm based in Gwynaffield.
Yes,
what we wanted to do is to bring to you some ideas and some answers to some of the really important questions that we've been getting from a lot of our members, especially in the digging group, over the last few weeks and months. We've been trying to collate some of those through our Facebook pages, and we've invited those comments from our membership over the last couple of weeks, and we've had some brilliant responses. So we've invited Rachel along to help us to answer some of those questions and to give you some valuable tips and hints in terms of how you can improve what you're doing in your gardens, whether they are your back gardens, your community gardens, whether you're new to growing or whether you are a little bit more experienced. We wanted to bring those answers to you so that you've got much more positive growing to do in 2021. So just before we go into some of the questions, Rachel, I just wanted to hand over to you to give us a little bit of background in terms of the wonderful work that you're doing over at Cae Rhug.
Oh, thank you very much. That's very complimentary. We're not there yet. We're just about to start. We've had a topsy-turvy year like everybody else has. A little bit about the history of Cae Rhug. A lot of people on your site might remember that we were running a community-supported agriculture scheme a few years ago, and we had to stop. Simon, my husband, had an accident and has for the past few years not been that mobile, and I've been his carer. And we're hoping for some changes in that direction. We've got some new treatments that are on the cards, and we'll see how we go. But we are restarting our community-supported agriculture scheme, along with lots of other exciting things. And hopefully 2021 is going to bring all that into action. But we focus mainly on improving people's well-being through outdoors and growing and through the arts. So I'm also an artist, and I want to bring that into my work as well. But we want to invite people over to Cae Rhug to they get really, really excited about growing their own food and just being outdoors and enjoying all of this. The lockdowns has shown us how much people needed to be outdoors. The well-being that they got from being outdoors has been, repeated over and over online, and we're all really aware of it. And both Outside Lives and Cae Rhug Holistic Farm want that for people. They want to make it as accessible as possible and to help people. So our history is growing veg. Simon and I both have conservation degrees, and we grow vegetables and fruit with that in mind. We want to grow in harmony with nature, and we adopt permaculture principles to do that. The site's no dig, and at the moment it's no dig to the point where it's over 1 metre high in weeds, and that's what we're going to be restoring this year with the help of some fabulous volunteers. Wonderful. So it's all exciting, and it's all about to kick off.
Brilliant, and I think it's wonderful that we get the chance to work with you as well to bring not only Cae Rhug to the forefront, so people know the work that you're doing and how it can actually support not only the community but people in their own back gardens to do much more and be much more adventurous and get into the to foster a love of gardening, really, isn't it? But I think the values that you have, both yourself and as the whole kind of Cae Rhug outlook is so in line with the work that we're doing at Outside Lives. It really does feel like a really great partnership to be forging. So thank you again for joining us.
Welcome.
So some of the questions that we've had from our viewers, the first question which we received was a lady that said, I grew tomatoes this year. I've had lots of fruit, but none of them have ripened. Can you give any advice in terms of what I can do differently? They were grown from seed and they were planted out when they were ready, and they were also from a number of varieties.
Right, okay. What would be really, really interesting to find out is when those tomatoes went in the ground. So, and whether they were planted outside or whether they were grown on in a greenhouse as well is a big one. We have quite a short season for tomatoes. So one of the things a lot of people don't know is that tomatoes are actually a perennial crop in the wild. So where they come from, they just keep growing. They don't have a season where they die off and you re-sow them. They are massive, massive plants. And we trick them here in the UK and say, right, okay, we're going to sow you and we're going to try and get you to grow really, really quickly, put out fruit. Then we're going to take the tops off you, so you can't grow any more leaves, and you're just going to ripen your fruit. So there's a few clues there as to the answers that you can do. Basically, the seeds need to go in early enough that when you plant them out, you've got the longest season possible, which becomes even more important if you're growing outdoors. So if you're growing outdoors, you need to pick a variety that's good for outdoors. And you need to get the plants as well grown inside as you can, so you can plant them out as nice, big, healthy plants as soon as the frosts have gone, which for us, we usually used to say 1st of June. It's increasingly coming towards the middle or early May, and you can give them a fleecy cover to help protect them in case you get the odd frost. You need to give them that longer growing season. Now, if you're growing in a polytunnel or a greenhouse, you've got that bit more protection, so you can get them out earlier and you can have a longer growing season, which is ideal. You, as I say, need to get varieties that are good for those two different scenarios. So you've got varieties that are better for a greenhouse or a polytunnel, and varieties that are better for outdoors. But usually the situation with tomatoes not ripening is they haven't had a long enough season or enough sunshine. And we didn't have the sunniest of years. We had a lot of cloud. And if your plants go in late, they didn't. So my crop in the greenhouse went in perfect timing. I probably ripened about half the fruit I normally would get if we'd had a particularly sunny or hot year. So the sun is a big one in that.
Right.
So advice for future: so reasonably early, not so early that your plants get leggy on the windowsill, but aim to have plants to go out around the beginning of June or the end of May, unless it looks like we've got a really mild year. What I noticed on a lot of the dig-in discussions was that people were sowing tomatoes as late as August. So I think I even saw somebody say they might sow some towards the end of August. There just isn't a long enough season for them to grow big enough to put out fruit. And even if they do put out fruit, it's missed all that sunshine.
Yeah, and that's so useful to know. I think as well, you do find that you can pick up what you think are established plants at garden centres and supermarkets and things like that as well. I've done that in the past and had very little success with those as well. So is there anything is that the same for the growing times and the season if you're getting established plants rather than seed?
Established plants is a good way to go. If you've got, in the house here, we've only got north-facing windows with windowsills that are big enough really for us to put plants. They don't grow that well here. No. I actually knit my early seedlings over to my mum's because she's got brilliant south-facing windowsills. You get leggy plants, and a leggy plant will flop over or be weak. They will not grow as well no matter what you do. You're better off starting late than getting a leggy plant. Buying in plants, as long as it's from a really good reputable source and they haven't been frosted, what you find with a lot of the plants that grow in some of either the supermarkets or the big stores is the people looking after them before you buy them aren't the growers. They're just a shop, and they may have let them get exposed to a draft or cold conditions or a frost. A lot of people buy them and they bring them into the warmth of their house, and the plant is going through huge fluctuations of I was outdoors a few minutes ago and now I'm inside. It's really difficult. And probably a lot of the listeners will have heard about hardening plants off as you transition them from maybe a centrally heated house through and out into the garden so you don't shock them. When you buy in plants, you need to buy them from a source that you know. So you're better buying direct from a grower or from a garden centre online, where you've got that little bit more surety of where your plant's been and what it's been put through. But either that said, I've bought plants off market stalls and all sorts, and it's just keeping an eye on them and being prepared that, I don't know what this plant's origins are. I'm going to just make sure I don't invest too much in it. I'm not going to buy loads of them, and I'm going to be prepared that I might lose it. I often buy chili plants. If I've damped off my chilies or something's gone wrong, I'll buy chilies because I've got a little boy who loves chilies and he loves his chili plants. And likewise, if I see an unusual variety, I'll get one. But I'm also very aware that I don't know what its growing conditions have been, and it might have been put through a bit of trauma before it gets to me. So there's that gentle time where you're looking after them a bit more if you're buying in plants. Okay,
that's brilliant advice. Thank you. Wonderful. So what is the best time of year to cut back rhubarb? And also, if you want to move it, when's the best time to do this?
Right, this is a wonderful question. You don't cut back rhubarb. It's really
Ah,
not a good idea at all. What you've got under the ground are some big knobbly bits, which are their root system. And when
yeah,
you cut them back, you leave a stem that's really juicy that rots, and it sends the rot back down and actually harms your wonderful healthy root ball. You actually pull rhubarb when you harvest it. You
right.
don't put a little tugging action, and it comes away. You probably, when you bought rhubarb, if you haven't had it all bought trimmed, it has like a little white sort of socket at the end with a bit of
Yeah,
brown leaf on it. It should look like that. So there's no correct time to cut back rhubarb at all. And with moving it, this is the right time. You wait till all the green's gone. You wait
yeah,
for all the stems to have gone and it's disappeared completely. And then you can dig up that big knobbly rooty bit and you can split it. And you can then replant it. So it's good to do that every few years. It's
yeah.
also quite good to buy in new rhubarb every few years because it does get a bit sort of like weakened over the years of all the harvesting
Okay.
and can get a bit more vulnerable to disease. So every few years, it's good to buy in some new stock. You
Yeah.
can sow it from seed. It takes that bit longer to establish. You can't harvest it for a couple of years, but that's another nice way to go. It's actually quite easy to sow.
Oh, brilliant. We've got some forcing pots in the garden as well. When should I be using those?
Spring growth. So there's nothing growing at the moment, but when you start to get warmer conditions, the plant can have that put on and it will just exclude the light a little bit and get it going. So you're trying to get some growth. So where it's in the garden, we're a bit cold still. They used to bring some of the rhubarb in and force it and try and get it growing earlier, which is a possibility. But what you need to be aware of if you're forcing is you're stressing the plant.
Right.
And that's okay if you intend to replace those. You can resow or you're going to buy new crops in, but you are weakening it by forcing it. It's putting it under a bit of stress. It makes the tender stems. It makes the tender stems nice and early, but that is at the expense of the plant. So often those plants would be sacrificed after they've been forced. So if you're going to do forcing, wonderful to have forcing pots, very envious. Just maybe do one or two plants, don't do all your plants. Otherwise, it'll be the expense of your season. It's a shortish season for forcing before you weaken those roots too much.
Wonderful. Brilliant. Thank you. Someone else said they started growing potatoes during lockdown and they've loved the results. But can they grow potatoes through the winter? And if so, what kind of potatoes should they be looking at growing?
Ah, right. Fantastic question again. And brilliant that they've enjoyed growing the potatoes over the summer as well. So it's a good crop to grow. What we find with potatoes is you nearly always leave some of them in the ground accidentally, whether you like it or not. Unless you're growing in a pot and you can really empty the pot, you always leave a few. And most veg growers will tell you that the potatoes pop up again the next year. So you can definitely grow them over the winter, but you're not going to be harvesting them. And only the potatoes that are deep enough under the ground are going to survive the frost. So if we get frosts in the top few inches, the potatoes just turn to this horrible mush because they obviously don't like the frost. So we don't tend to grow through the winter. They're not a good crop through the winter. We also have a history in Britain of trying to rotate where potatoes go because we get diseases that stay in the soil. So you tend to grow them in the summer, clear them and harvest them and grow them in a different place the next year. But I've been asked lots of questions about growing potatoes through the winter this year, and it has prompted me to question, well, you know, as things change because our climate is changing. And I was really interested to read that somebody down south was growing them as a perennial crop and actually keeping them in one place and harvesting a few and just letting them die off over the winter and leaving potatoes in the ground. And I'm fascinated to learn more. It's something that we might put an area aside at Kyrie and experiment with, but it's not something that I'm at ease with yet because of it's something that it's always been not such a good idea if we're in a colder climate to do. And also with the possibilities that you've got disease that are going to live on in the tubers in the ground and then pop back up again. So really and truly, if you want to grow potatoes over the winter, you're looking at a small amount of potatoes, perhaps new potatoes for Christmas dinner, that you can put snug in a pot and take into maybe a conservatory or a greenhouse, somewhere really nice and well lit that's frost free. And you need to get those potatoes in back in August. So it's a bit late for them this year.
Right.
But I would not rule out growing potatoes through the winter because you've almost certainly got some in the ground somewhere that are loitering and ready to come up in the spring. No matter how thorough I am, I've always left one or two.
And is there any particular type of soil that people should be should be thinking about utilising for improving potato growing?
There are people tend to associate the Jersey Royals grows in a really, really sandy, light sort of soil, and that's very specific to them. Potatoes like a fair amount of moisture in the soil, so a moisture retentive soil is bad. So a clay soil is not a bad environment for growing a potato, as long as it's not too heavy. They like manure, and they like, they need a fair bit of food putting onto them. And at Cae Rhug, what we're doing is no dig. So all that nutrients is putting on top. So we don't mind what's going on in our soil underneath. All the nutrients are going on top. And that makes an ideal moisture retentive environment for the potatoes. So it's not too bad. You can work with whatever soils you've got.
Yeah.
Just think about adding either manure or good quality, home compost, whatever you've got that you can add to the top layer. And keep building it up around your potatoes. You can harvest your potatoes. You don't need to, if you've been doing that for a few years, you don't need to dig them up. They will come up quite nicely.
Yeah.
And then you keep adding for the next year. So wherever you're growing your potatoes, just make sure you've got lots of nutrients added to the top surface and don't worry too much what you've got underneath.
Brilliant. And what about the bags that you can buy as well? So say, for instance, someone's not got a lot of growing space and they wanted to use some of those reusable bags, because I guess you can control what soil you use a bit better.
You don't need to spend a fortune on reusable bags. I would just go and get a good sized sack of compost, empty the compost out, or half the compost out. In fact, empty it all out, turn it inside out so it's black on the outside, because most of the compost bags are black. Put half the soil back in and plant your potatoes and roll down the top. And then as your plants grow and you need to earth them up, you just unfold the bag a bit and throw a bit more soil on top. Because bags that are designed for growing potatoes are actually really, really expensive and you don't need it. You can just puncture a few holes in the sack so that most of them will have holes in anyway, the compost sack, so they don't get too heavy and wet. But make sure it's got some good drainage. And then it's absolutely ideal. Because most people are having to buy compost anyway. So you're reusing the bag. Try to find some peat-free compost, which should be more readily available as we move away from peat-based compost. And just pop your potatoes in there. And that's an ideal one. You can move them around. You can extend your season because you can bring them maybe into the cover of a greenhouse or a polytunnel towards the end of the season if you want to extend it. But they make for an ideal one and they're reusable.
Brilliant. Oh, that's fantastic advice. And I think there'll be a load of people.
Very thorough for getting your potatoes out as well. You don't have all the lost ones that I get in the veg patch. You get every potato when you empty them out.
Absolutely. So it's limiting your waste then as well, isn't it? You're getting everything, which is brilliant. And I think there'll be so many people who maybe want to grow potatoes or other kind of root vegetables as well, who don't have the space, and I think those bags could be potentially quite useful for them then, couldn't they?
And they are. You can sort of shape them to wherever you want. If you don't want the ugliness of a black bag, you can drop them into your border, or you can have something. I mean, you can just get a Hessian sack and wrap it round them, and it'll look lovely and really, really pretty. You can put a bow on it. You can do whatever you want. You can make those potatoes look beautiful, and it's a really easy one for people to grow. It's a really nice.
That's brilliant. So on about, I guess, the fruits of our labours now. What about vegetables that we're producing? Sometimes, you can have particularly good season and you'll have a very productive crop of potatoes or anything else. What can be frozen so that you're not I know you can obviously give a lot away, which is brilliant, be a bit more kind of community focused in terms of your providing some of that wealth to others. But one that's kind of particularly been highlighted was chard, and an abundance of chard that someone can't keep on top of, gone a bit wild. Can it be frozen?
Right. Specifically, I don't know about chard, whether I'm guessing I can treat it like a lot of the other vegetables. Stems have got lots and lots of water. When you freeze them, they expand and they destroy it. So if you think about things like a strawberry, trying to freeze a strawberry, it's just going to go to mush. But there are ways around it. So with a lot of the vegetables, what we can do is blanch them. So that's just plunging them into hot water for a couple of minutes. And that helps because they're partly cooked. It helps with the freezing. So you can lay them out, chop them up, blanch, lay them out on a tray and freeze them in the tray. So they're all spaced out, and then scoop them back up once they're frozen and tie them into a bag so that you can cook with them that way. A lot of the veg that doesn't freeze well, I cook into meals before I freeze it. So we eat a lot of vegetarian food and tend to do things like lasagnas and curries with lots of vegetables in them. I just make those with anything. Then I can throw everything in, cook in one go, and freeze the batches of curry. Things like peas and beans, they're brilliant. Just blanch, put in. There's a lot of veg you can do. There's some obviously that you can't. That's that bit harder. Potatoes don't freeze well. You can buy oven ready chips. Therefore, they come out of the freezer and you can throw them in. There are ways of cooking or working. So the vegetables that don't freeze well just fresh are usually ones whereby you blanch them and try again.
Okay.
So it's all very specific. There's loads of information regarding that online. You can Google how to freeze veg and find those answers specific, because all vegetables are a bit different. But yes, most veg you'll be able to store in your freezer in some form.
Brilliant, because we don't like waste.
Strawberries, I mean, you just make them into something else that will freeze. You can't freeze the perfect fruit, but there's always a way. And then, of course, you've also got jarring and tinning fruit as well. So
absolutely. So preserving is probably a whole other video in itself, really, isn't it? Preserving and pickling.
We're building a roundhouse with a kitchen and toilets at Cae Rhug, and one of the things we'll be doing is preserving courses, because it's something that people really want to learn. It's how to harvest, bring in, clean up, and actually get it to the stage where they can preserve it for the winter use. And I think it's something that a lot of people have lost the skills of over the years. We just, even
going back to our roots, really, isn't it?
To do this, I've got to remember how, and it's something, especially now, that I think if everybody can do that for themselves, it really reduce their food bills and also increase their health and their well-being while they're doing it.
Absolutely, yeah. I think it's re-engaging with some of those kind of more the practices that I think have been lost, as you say, over the years. Our grandparents probably did it an awful lot to make sure that they had jars of things to keep them going through the colder months when there wasn't an abundance of fruit and vegetables. And I think you're right, it's become somewhat in fashion again now, hasn't it? And I think that's massively beneficial for people to be picking back up on those lost arts as well.
I'm actually sitting probably in the spot where I stood as a child, working with my nan, making a variety of chutneys and tinned things. Wonderful. And the cupboard would have been just to the side of me here, and there would have been masses of jars in it. And I can still remember the really sort of pungent smells and all those things. And as a child, I wasn't that keen on it. I really didn't like these vinegary, strong smells. And now I think I wish I'd put that aside and learned more about what she was doing, because now I'm thinking I really would like to know what exactly she put in. I can remember it tasted amazing, and I would love to know.
Wonderful. That's such a lovely memory to have as well.
It's really nice, and it's very clear, because we're living in the house that was hers. It makes it more relevant.
Brilliant. Oh, that's such a lovely story. And I think the final question that we had from one of our members was, we're obviously moving into the colder months now, albeit as we kind of established before, it's relatively mild for this time of year. But we are going to potentially get some frost. And what do we need to be doing to protect our vegetables or anything in the ground from any frost that we might have over the coming weeks and months?
Okay, we are getting frosts here at Cae Rhug. Our ground at the CSA field is a bit lower, and there's good frost most mornings now. When you're a little bit higher up, or when you get up a bit later, you might not even be aware that there's been a frost, but we are very mild for December. We would usually be a lot colder than this. Yeah. As a result, some of the crops that are growing over the summer that would usually have ended about September, October are still growing well. But they're going to be the ones that are vulnerable. But you have to think, well, is there any point keeping them? They're not necessarily going to keep cropping. So it does really depend. But if you've got crops that are meant to be in the ground, so your leeks and your sprouting broccoli and your sprouts for your Christmas dinner, kales, all those things that you can eat through the winter, they don't need really very much in the way of protection from frost, because they're plants that are designed to grow in those conditions. But hungry pigeons will be an issue, so those will need to have some sort of net over them if you've got pigeons about. In terms of what might benefit from a bit of protection are things like the salad crops. If you've got spinach in there, or rocket, or a few salad leaves for winter harvesting, those could either do with a fleecy covering or being grown in a polytunnel or a greenhouse. And even then, a polytunnel doesn't really protect from the frost that much, so a fleece layer over that. And you can buy that in a garden centre. Or if you have got anything that's a nice light cloth in the house, you don't want to exclude light, so it needs to be something, and you don't want to crush the plants. It's got to be something quite light. But sometimes people have got fine mesh curtains and things that they can put down. And again, just help. Particularly with sort of a salad crop, it's quite gentle and you don't want to squash it flat, so you don't want any heavy fabric on it. But just putting a fleece over, and then on a nice sunny day, let it breathe, reel it back. That helps to reduce fungal activity, and they don't want too many spores or anything under there. And then make sure you put it back down again at night before it's had a chance to get too cold. Depth of winter, the fleece can stay on, and most days I don't pull it back because it's just too cold.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for giving us such wonderful, kind of detailed, rich answers in terms of some of those questions. I think, you know, the viewers for the Dig In channel, and hopefully, you know, for our other channels as well, will be super appreciative of the information. And you know, what we want to do is to encourage people to we just want to encourage people to be you know, fostering that love of gardening, even if you're brand new to it. It's something that I think a lot of people have rediscovered a passion, or they have had the ability to spend some time to kind of, you know, gain a bit of a love of gardening over the last few months. And I think there's an awful lot of terrible things that have happened this year, but there's also been some brilliant things environmentally that I think that this has given us as well. And I think people spending time outdoors in their gardens has been one of them. So that's
great. Hopefully.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you so much for your time, Rach.
You're welcome, and thank you for the opportunity.
No problem at all. And what we hope is that we can bring another one of these videos to the members in a few weeks' time, if that's okay with you.
Absolutely. It's been a pleasure to answer. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks so much.
Take care. Bye. Bye.